welcome to Emanuel Church. I'm Gabriel Garcia, me and my wife, who you just heard from. She didn't say her name, but Lejinska. We have the opportunity to and blessing to pastor this church here. And y'all pray for us. We're celebrating a year of marriage next week, next Monday. And it's been a journey, but it's been fun. So I'm glad to have you here today. I'm so happy to see a lot of new faces here. We're continuing. We're in week 3 of our series called Jesus in 3D. Jesus in 3D. And this series, we've been looking through the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke and exploring different stories where we see who Jesus really is, and we understand a little bit more about what he has asked us to do, how he's lived, and what the call that he has put on our lives, and the example that he has left us. Because a lot of times I think we get Jesus wrong. Especially believers that have been in church or been going to church or grew up in church, if you ever grew up in church, we get him wrong because we have a Jesus that's built on tradition, that's built on preconceptions of what we have. We think he's this, we think he's that. I mean, there's a lot of people, we have, Jesus was this race, Jesus was Jewish, that we know that much. He was Jewish Jesus. He didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes or anything like that. I don't know that he had six-pack abs, because sometimes we see pictures that Jesus is on the cross and he's got like a six-pack. I don't know. I mean, we don't know what he looked like, but there's a lot of stuff that we have that build our conceptions of who Jesus was, and I think we get it wrong. We get who he was wrong. We get his message wrong a lot of the time, what he was trying to tell us, because Jesus said some crazy stuff. Jesus, I mean, there were times people thought Jesus was a cannibal because he said, eat my flesh and drink my blood. That's crazy. How do you reconcile that? It's hard to understand what he means sometimes. And I mean, he did it on purpose. He told his disciples, I say these confusing stories on purpose. I'm telling you what it means, but I don't tell everybody. And I think that's he does that because he wants us to be able to seek after him, to question what he's saying to us, to explore who God is in our lives and what he means to us and how we should actually follow him with the scriptures that he's left behind us. And last week, we spoke about the calling of Matthew in our lives, the calling of Matthew in our lives. No, we spoke about how Jesus called Matthew and what that meant for us. And the first week we talked about Jesus healing the leper and how he's asking us to reach out to the outcast. And now today I'm going to share a story from Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 to 27. We should have it on our screens above. If you don't have a Bible with you today, or you're using your Bible app, it's okay. I'm using the Bible app. Well, I'm not using the Bible app. I'm using my notes. So just follow along with me if you don't. Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 to 27. The story is Jesus calming the storm in our lives. He says, "Then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake, so that waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, 'Lord, save us, we're going to drown.' He replied, 'You of little faith, why are you so afraid?' Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, 'What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him.'" Father, I ask that you use your word to speak to us today, that we might hear what you have to say to our hearts and let it change us. In Jesus' name, everyone says amen. So this story is also found in the Gospels of Mark, chapter 4, verse 35 to 42, and Luke, chapter 22 to 25. Now, I'm not going to go and read all of that because that's a lot of reading. And, you should read your Bible. It's important. But we're not going to read it all today. This is not a Bible reading session. But the story is interesting to me because it seems like a simple story on the surface. Jesus is taking a nap. He just went through a lot. Like, this story follows closely after Jesus healing the leper. It's what we talked about a couple weeks ago. And after that, he went into town, he healed the leper, and then he couldn't get away from the crowd still. He still had people following him, people pursuing him for something. He healed a lot more people still. He still did a lot more teaching. And after that, Jesus was tired. So Jesus wants to get away from everybody, and he tells the disciples, let's get into the boat and let's go to the other side of the lake. And this was interesting. I didn't know this about this story. Is he did that because on the other side were a lot of Gentile towns, people who weren't Jewish, and so the Jewish people that were following him, the crowds that were following him, he did that because he knew they wouldn't follow him over there. Jews had this strict rule of not interacting with people like us. Nobody's Jewish here, I don't know. But if you're Jewish, that's the way they did it back then. And so Jesus was telling people, he was telling the disciples, I want to go to the other side so we can rest. So I can rest, so I can relax. And so Jesus decides he's going to take a nap on the boat. I mean, I don't know about you, but I need a nap on Sundays, amen? So he tries to take a nap, and he's just, let's go, we're going to be all right, let's go to the other side. And so the story keeps going. The area that they were in, this is the Sea of Galilee. And the Sea of Galilee is known for crazy storms that happen all of a sudden. People have different ways of thinking. They think it's because there are mountains to the north of it, and the winds come down, and they cause storms that come down. And it's known for random, sudden storms. And so the water could have been completely calm before when Jesus asked the disciples to go on the boat with him. It could have been. We don't know. But all of a sudden, a storm comes up, and the disciples are panicking. They're desperate. And this is interesting because several of the disciples, at least 4 of them, were seasoned fishermen. And so they knew what it was to be on the Sea of Galilee. They knew that there were storms that would come up without expectation. For even them to panic means this was bad. This was a bad situation. I was reading in a commentary, and it says that the word that they use, they translate furious, is seismos. It's a Greek word, seismos. It's the word that we get seismic activity from, earthquakes. It tells us that the water was shaking so much, that the boat was shaking, that everything around them just seemed like the world was going to end. I mean, I've never been on a boat. I have been I've been on the ferry that takes me to San Jacinto Monument. That's like the only boat I've ever been on. I don't know if you've been on a boat or if you've been at the deep sea or anything like that, but I can't even imagine what it would be like to be on a boat and then all of a sudden have being filled with water. The disciples are panicking, the water's shaking, the boat is shaking, and they wake Jesus up because for whatever reason, he sleeps through this storm. He's a heavy sleeper. I usually am a heavy sleeper for the most part. Sometimes tiny sounds wake me up, though, in the middle of the night. Someone opens my door. I'm like, who's here? Who's in my room? Who's sleeping? That used to happen to me because sometimes my parents would come and check on me in the middle of the night when I was little, and I'd be like, what's going on? Who's waking me up? But I slept. But I feel Jesus. If you're tired enough, you sleep through a storm. I slept through Hurricane Ike. It was going. It was raining. I was just sleeping. I woke up. I saw the rain. And I was like, nah, I'm asleep. But Jesus was in that kind of situation. He was tired. He needed rest, and he's like, I'm going to sleep. And so the disciples decide to wake him up in a panic, yelling and screaming at him. And I'm just trying to give you a good picture of this situation. If there was something going on like this in your life, you would panic. If you even knew it was happening. I was on a mission trip a couple of years ago to Nicaragua. I was taking a shower. And the building we were in was like it was a place where they bring classes and people, and they have people stay there sometimes. So there's multiple showers, and there's another guy and like a couple showers down. And all of a sudden, we feel the building shake, and we're like, I wonder what that was. And we're like, it's probably construction, because they had like a big old tractor outside, and I was like, they're probably doing something. Come down. We went to find out. We went to breakfast, and they told us, did y'all feel that? I was like, yeah, what was that? It was an earthquake. We're like, excuse me? Excuse me? We didn't know what was going on. Maybe Jesus had no idea what was happening. And he gets up, he calms the storm, and everybody is amazed at what's happening. And so this story tells us a lot of different things about who Jesus was, and it tells us a lot about the disciples. It wasn't. We don't know if it was just the disciples. In Mark, it tells us that there were other boats That it wasn't just the 12 that was with him. He was probably in a boat with the 12, and then there was other boats following along with him. Jesus had his entourage following him. So they were here, and everybody was panicking. Everybody's thinking that they're going to die. This is it. This is the end of our lives. We thought this man was something, but we're screaming. He doesn't even care. He's taking a nap. But I find this story real interesting because Jesus had to have known the storm was coming. You know, I don't know what you know about Jesus, but we believe that Jesus was 100% a man. He was human. He lived a human life. He grew up. His parents had to take care of him. He was until he was a teenager, and I mean, he was the sassy 12-year-old, from what we know in the Bible, telling his parents, "Don't you know I'm about my Father's business?" He was a sassy 12-year-old, but I mean, he grew up. He had a regular life. He had a job. He worked with his father as a carpenter, his earthly father as a carpenter. But he was also 100% God. He was God and he was man, and he knew this storm was coming. He had to have known. But he's like, I'm going to take a nap. I know it's coming, but I'm going to take a nap. I need this rest. And so it's interesting because we see God, and we know that with Jesus we see God, and we see that He knew that the storm was coming, but that didn't mean he didn't care. The disciples assumed that because Jesus was sleeping, that means he didn't care about what was happening to them. And I think that's how we are a lot of times. Just because we're going through difficult times, we're going through difficult seasons or stuff in our lives, and we don't see God respond to prayers, or we don't see good things happening to us, we automatically assume that must mean that God doesn't care or he's not paying attention to us. And so, but we miss the point, though. And that's what I'm going to get to into the story. We miss the point about it because if Jesus knew the storm was coming, and Jesus decided to sleep anyway, he knew that they were going to be okay. He understood and trusted that if he was with them, everything was going to be okay. Jesus still had a mission to accomplish on earth, and he knew he wasn't going to die in the storm. He was going to die on a cross. And so his purpose wasn't fulfilled. And says, I understand where I'm at right now, right here. The storm isn't going to get me, and it's not going to get y'all. Y'all okay? Y'all are with me. Get it. You get it? I know that I'm with you, so you're going to be fine. God is with me, so we're going to be good. And so Jesus knew this, and he sees something about life and something about the world around them that we don't, because Jesus sees things a step back from us. We only see what's right in front of us. That's how we live life. We don't get to see what's around us. You know, if you have good peripheral vision, maybe you can see on the sides of you, but that's about it. There's not much else that you can do about your vision. We have limited vision and we have limited experience because our experience is determined just by what is around us. Who is around us? I mean, you got to think about it. There are times when you don't even think about certain people in your life because you don't see them. It doesn't matter if they're family or close friends or anything. You're going through your life and you're not understanding. It's not that you're not understanding. It's that you don't see them there, so they're not there to you. Your life, you don't see what's going on in your life. You don't see what's going on in their life. You don't understand the bigger picture, but Jesus sees the bigger picture. God sees the bigger picture. He knows that everything's going to be okay in our lives if we just would trust him. So the storm in the story, this is a literal storm. But, Christians, we always use the word, there are storms in our lives. I mean, I don't know that anybody else talks like that. But we talk like that. There are storms in our lives. You tell that to someone on the street that's not a believer, I don't know what they're going to think of. You crazy. There are storms in our lives, though. There are things. What that means is there's difficulties. We go through difficulties, and there's a lot of different things that can mean. It can mean sickness. Maybe you've got something health-wise that's right. Mental health issues that you're going through. Physical health issues. Maybe your finances. Maybe you're broke. I don't know. I pray that I don't stay broke. It can be people. Look at your neighbor, and you might say, you might be my problem. No, I'm just kidding. Don't tell them that. Don't offend them that way. I don't know. Maybe I said that and you're like, yeah, that's them. I don't know why I'm with them today, but I am. And so there's a lot of things that the storms can be in our lives, and we don't always know the outcome. And so because we don't see the outcome, we see our immediate vicinity to the problem and think this is it. This is the end all of it. And we only imagine what's going to be in our immediate future. But see, following Jesus, and even following Jesus doesn't mean that we're not going to have problems in our lives. You know, I wish it were true. It would be so simple. There are a lot of people out there that preach the gospel of name it and claim it. That BMW, it's mine. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't. I wish it would be amazing. You know, that $1 million house, that's mine. That's mine. No, it doesn't work that way. I wish it was as easy as you do good stuff and good stuff happens to you. But that's not the way the world works either. You know, that's not the way God works either. Just because you do good things doesn't mean he's not going to allow storms and testings. In fact, if we learn anything from this story, Jesus deliberately took the disciples into the storm. He knew that it was coming, and he said, we're going to go. This is going to happen. Difficult things happen in life because life is filled with complex choices that we make and other people make, and our circumstances and the world around us is determined by that. God definitely has a part in this world and a way to intervene and change the circumstances. As we see, he calmed the storm. But we're going to go through difficult things in our lives. And just because of that doesn't mean that God is not with us. See, we are the disciples in this story. Because humans, we are bad at good things. Now, we're not just bad at doing good things. We're bad at thinking positive thoughts. I remember reading a study that said 80% of the thoughts you think in one day are negative. 80%. And I was reading about this study that was done from researchers in Chicago, or it was at Penn State, and they did a study with people in Chicago and Mexico City, and they asked them to list emotions. And 50% of the emotions they listed were negative. Only 30% were positive. And 20% of them were neutral emotions. And so even our emotions, our thoughts, our emotions, our experiences, and our memories, we remember bad things more than we remember good things. It's easier for us to focus on the negative, and the disciples here, they were focusing immediately on the negative, immediately forgetting what they had just seen. They had just seen Jesus do an unbelievable miracle in healing a leper. They had just seen him heal all kinds of people and speak with authority they have never seen before, and they didn't apply that to their current situation. All they saw was the storm. And that happens to us. It happens to us because life is difficult. Man, if anybody tells you that life is easy, I don't know what kind of life they're living. They must have been born into money. I don't even know. Like, rich people probably have their own problems too, but I don't know them. I don't know those problems. It would be easier to live their life. At least I think so. And so the disciples, instead of showing that they trusted Jesus and the things that he had just done for them, they focused instead on the negative, and that brought out their fear instead of their faith. It brought up their fear instead of their faith. See, when Jesus asked them at the end of the story, "Oh, you of little faith, why are you afraid?" He was not addressing the symptom of fear. He was looking deeper, and he was saying, there's a problem with your faith. You're not trusting me enough to realize that here I am standing with you, speaking to you in this situation. If you knew I was with you, why did you doubt that we were ever going to reach the other side? Why did you doubt that this situation was going to turn out still for good? They weren't thinking, because fear exposes weakness in our lives. Fear exposes what we lack. Fear exposes what we really trust and really hold on to. See, the disciples, they went to Jesus and they started screaming at Jesus, "Why are you sleeping?" I don't know. I don't know about Jesus, but he seemed like he was in a bad mood when he woke up. I don't know what you're reading into this, but if you're taking a nap and someone suddenly wakes you up for something that's like, for us, we see this as a storm. But for Jesus, it's like, man, this is nothing. Why are you waking me up for nothing? Someone wakes you up in the middle of a nap, you're having a good nap. Where's the remote? I don't know, and I don't care. What is happening? that's almost the equivalent of what we can see. Jesus is like, man, why? I'm sleeping. Peace, be still. I'm going to go back to sleep. I'm going to go back to sleep. And so the disciples, they let their fear take control instead of their faith, and they allowed themselves to fall away and pay attention to something other than Jesus. In Matthew chapter 7, the last parts of that verse, 18 to 22, Jesus had just finished talking to the disciples about what it meant to follow him. And he said, it's a lot. It costs a lot. It's not easy to follow me. You have to give up everything. We talked about that last week. You have to give up everything to follow me. And the 12 decided somehow, some way that this is what we were going to do. And they got in a boat with Jesus. And so they lost sight of that fact in that moment, and they allowed fear to control them. And we do that a lot. We allow fear to control us. We allow doubt to control us. We allow worry to control us. We allow our sickness, our conditions, our situations. We allow other people to control us. It's like, man, nobody tells me what to do. Sure, they may not tell you what to do, but when they have done something to you and you haven't forgiven them, they are taking up space in your mind and controlling your anger and your emotions and your problems. They're taking up space in your life that they don't need to. That you are allowing them to do that. And people control us all the time because we don't forgive, or we're angry at people, or we're... I don't even know. Sometimes there are people, I mean, I've grown up in church. I have seen people get mad at people over the dumbest things in the world. You know, there are people that I've seen leave churches because, well, I didn't like the music. Okay, that's fine. That's your musical choice. But if God is speaking to you in this place, that doesn't mean you got to leave. Or just because they didn't like the way one brother or sister looked at them. You know, I went to a church one time in San Antonio. There was a guy, he always sat in the same spot. I've told this story before, but it's hilarious. He sat in the same spot every week. And one time there was someone who had never been to the church, and they sat in his spot. I saw him walk through the door. He looked at that man, and he walked out and never came back that day. I don't understand. People do that, though. We get upset and we allow people to control us, circumstances, situations, and all of this is coming into our lives, and we're allowing it to shape us. And Jesus is standing right there, and he's saying, why don't you trust in me? I'm here for you. But we think that he's left us or abandoned us or put us to the side. He's not listening to us, or he's just letting us suffer. But God is not a cruel God. He is a God of love and of peace and of hope. If Jesus is sleeping, that means you got nothing to worry about. If Jesus is taking it easy, that means it's going to be okay. You know, we don't understand. I think we miss the point of difficult circumstances in our lives. We see them and we think it's some kind of punishment. Okay, I'm not going to lie to you. Some of the stuff you might do might be punishment because it's self-inflicted. You make bad choices, dumb choices, and you will face the consequences for that. That's going to happen. You know? That's going to happen. I remember listening to a pastor. He said that people keep asking him, is this sin? Is this sin? He's like, no, but it's stupid. Why would you do it? I don't understand why you would do it. So we're going to face the consequences of stupid decisions in our lives. That's going to happen. But difficult circumstances aren't always caused by our difficulties. Our decisions. I don't know what I said there. But difficult circumstances aren't always caused by our decisions. Sometimes they're caused because God is trying to work something in us. And in this situation, I believe God was trying to work something in the disciples. And he says, I need you to understand who you really need to trust and who I really am. Because it's interesting in this story. In the book of Luke, it tells us that Jesus, or not the book of Luke, in the book of Mark, it tells us Jesus spoke to the storm and he said, quiet, be still, or peace, be still, in other translations. And that's interesting because he spoke to the storm. He spoke to the natural forces in the world. And that brings us back to the picture of who he is in the book of Genesis. God, in the beginning, in the book of Genesis, it tells us that God created the world through his words. He just spoke it into existence. That's all he needed to do. It didn't make any difference. He didn't have to take any other action than his voice. And in this moment, all it says is that Jesus stood up and spoke those words to the storm. And the disciples were amazed, astounded, and it says, and in two versions, in Mark and Luke, it tells us they were afraid. They didn't understand who he was before. They just thought that Jesus was just this good guy, this good man, this teacher, this prophet who said stuff that, nobody had said before. He understood things that other people didn't do, and he loved people unconditionally. Like, man, this, I can get behind this guy. There are a lot of people that see Jesus like that today, that he's just a good man. He was a good man that lived a couple thousand years ago, and we can learn a lot from him, and that's true. But he was more than that. He was showing the disciples the way that I spoke creation into motion at the very beginning of everything. This is the way I speak right now. The winds and the waves, they obey me because they know my voice. Nobody can just do that. I grew up as a kid. Sometimes I heard this story and I go outside, it's raining. I go, peace be still. It didn't work. It just didn't work. But Jesus, the winds and the waves and nature, they understood his voice. They heard it and they answered to it, because the man that we follow, the God that we follow, Jesus, who we follow, isn't just a good man. He is the creator of the universe, who is able to step into our lives and calm the most difficult of circumstances. It doesn't matter what you're going through. He knows. Sometimes he leads us into those circumstances. Sometimes you lead yourself into those circumstances. Sometimes other people put you there, but it doesn't matter. Because Jesus, the same Jesus who brings you through a storm, is the same Jesus who stands with you in any other storm. He is the one who looks at all the world and understands that it bends to his will and to his voice. So if we're standing with that Jesus, there's nothing that we should be afraid of. There's nothing that we should doubt him for. And look, we're going to do it. We're going to doubt. We're going to be afraid. Things are going to be hard in life. But it's okay as long as we get the picture and remember who he is. And remember that he is there for us. I've been through a lot of stuff in my life. I've seen a lot of times in my life where I haven't had a lot. There were times, my parents are pastors and I grew up in a pastor's house. And there were times at the church, they couldn't provide for my parents' salary. And it was difficult. Sometimes we didn't even know where things were going to come from, but we always saw God provide. I've been through Bible school where I didn't have money, and I didn't even know if I was going to eat the next day other than the food that provided in the cafeteria, and you don't always want to eat that food, cafeteria food. Bible school food, cafeteria food. Sometimes it's great. Yeah, other times, I don't know. One week they served a shepherd's pie for 5 days in a row for dinner. I went to McDonald's. I was tired of that. But I've been through difficult circumstances. I've faced difficult things. I have had loss in my life. In my first year of Bible school, one story I remember in particular is I had gone. It's in San Antonio, and as I was there, my grandpa passed away, and I knew he had been sick, and I knew that he was in the hospital and he was under care and other things, but I never got a chance to say goodbye. And when I got the phone call that he had passed, it broke me. And I didn't know what else to do, and I just, in that moment, I was angry and upset, and I was crying out to God. It's like, why would you do this if I'm doing all the right things? There are stuff in my life that I want to follow you, God, and I want to believe that you're here for me, but why would you do this if I'm following you? And I just remember in that moment, my roommate was there, and I hadn't known this guy for a long time, but I just remember he heard me sobbing, and he was like, "What's wrong?" And I just could barely muster out the words that my grandpa had passed away. And when that happened, he ran out of the room. I was like, man, this jerk. I don't know if he wanted to give me space or whatever. Like, in the moment, that's what I was thinking. But he went out and he got together as many people he could find in the guy's dorm, and he brought them back to the room, and they all began praying for me. And I remember in that moment that I felt God's presence and His love, and He was speaking to me and telling me, I know this is difficult. I know you're here because I called you to, but I haven't abandoned you in this storm. I haven't abandoned you in this difficult situation. I've been there. You have probably been there, and you might not even have noticed. Because I think that that's one of the things the disciples missed here. And I'm about to close up here. But I think that's one of the things the disciples missed here is that they were going through this storm, but Jesus was right there with them. I said that a minute ago, but He was right there with them. He hadn't left them. He hadn't abandoned them. He knew what was happening. He knew what was going to happen. And His rest was saying, you can relax and rest in me because here I am with you. That's Jesus. No matter what difficulties life brings us, that's Jesus. Able to stand with us, to rest with us, to cry with us, to go through it with us. He was there in the storm alongside with them. He didn't leave them. That is the Jesus that we serve, and that is the Jesus that is here for you today. Would you stand with me this afternoon? I'm still morning mode. Maybe I need some more coffee. But this Jesus is here for you today. And there is something that you're going through in life, and life doesn't make sense sometimes. Life is confusing, and life can be difficult, and you don't always know why stuff happens. But He is here through all of that. If you will trust Him today, if you would make that decision to trust Him today, He is going to carry you through the storm. Life is hard, but Jesus stands with us.